Good space time, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Web3 podcast, your source for educational insights into the Web3 universe and your connection hub to discovering those that contribute to building the decentralized world. Today, we are joined by Zac from Aztec. We touch upon physics refugees, the technological gold rush, and fairness. We discuss trust infrastructure technology, software you can only run once, and privacy versus semantics. Finally, we talk about cryptography, increasing decentralization, and fears. If you enjoy our podcast, please share this episode to your favorite social platform to help us spread Web3 values across the universe.
Only someone who's been through the absolute horrors of something like World War I can write a book which is so ridiculously kind of like optimistic in its understanding, perspective on the human condition and the human spirit. I feel like people who are attracted into the hard sciences, they're attracted to complexity and they're attracted to novelty. And there's a lot of that in spades in blockchain. I think in 5 years, if there's not significant amount of real-world assets being transmitted on blockchains through privacy technologies, then I think that is a failure. Play to your strengths, find people to cover for your weaknesses and be very open about it. Money is autonomy, it's agency,
Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Citizen Web3 podcast, and I'm glad to have Zac from Aztec with me today. Zac, hi. Welcome to the show, man.
Hi there. Hey, Serge. Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Yes, glad, man. So I'm going to dive into, the first kind of a little bit boring, but it must ask thing. I'm going to ask you for the listeners, to introduce yourself, even for those who know you, for myself and the others probably as well. Still, please introduce yourself, including your intro, maybe your Web3 background, and what are you working on right now?
Sure thing. Yeah, who the hell am I? So I am Zac. I am the CEO of Aztec Labs. We are a layer 2, a privacy-first layer 2 for Ethereum. My Web3 background it goes back 8 years, which I think in this industry makes me a bit of a dinosaur. I came in with a startup called Creditment, trying to do TradFi on-chain, syndicated loans, mid-market debt, boring stuff, but important, impactful, but ended up basically becoming a cryptographer, pivoting into privacy technology, doing what I'm doing today.
That was quick, man, for you, considering your history. But let's dig into it. Let's dig into it a little bit. I like people who are modest. Thank you, Zac, for that, by the way. So Zac has actually done a lot more, guys. And
you should come to London. You should live in Britain. Yeah.
I did. I grew up in the UK, man. So that is where it's coming from. Oh man. Zac, I know you also come from a physics background, right? Tell me, how does it work for you, diving into something at first, I guess, when you're studying physics? It's a proper study, let's say, right? Proper subject, let's call it like that. Down to earth study. And then you kind of, shift to Web3. And I can see the logic, but how was it for you? How was the progress for you from going one thing to another? And
yeah, it was very arbitrary. There are a lot of physics refugees in Web3, let's say, because I think there's many people who started out like me. I wanted to be an academic. I wanted to be a scientist, unpicking the secrets of reality, understanding how the universe works and all its mysteries. It's very compelling and alluring. And so I set about that path. I got a PhD in experimental particle physics, neutrino physics. But I wasn't really cut out for academic life. Looking back, I didn't have the mind for it. I couldn't really navigate the political situation. It was the reality of academia it was very different to my naive dreams of it. And so basically, I left academia and was effectively just searching. I guess you could say searching for something more interesting to do. So I kind of fell into Web3. After my PhD, I got a regular programming job in London, and was kind of just wondering what to do next with my life when my brother, who is an opera singer, not a tech person, was like, "Yo, Zac, I've got my best friend Tom. He wants to do a blockchain startup, but he needs a technical co-founder. Do you want to meet him?" And that's how that all started. So it was very, very arbitrary, really.
It is. You mentioned physics refugees, and I'm gonna concur to that, because I think over the past 6 years or whatever, I've been doing the podcast particularly and been in this industry for a lot longer, like yourself. But I've noticed that maybe 5 to 10% of my guests have either studied physics or something related to scientific based subjects. So yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of people see, I guess, and this is going to be the question, a lot of people, I guess, see resemblance between, blockchain decentralized organism and a real life nature resembling like forests or mycelium or whatever. Do you think that that's maybe what attracts people who studied physics, biology, and other scientific subjects to here, the resemblance?
Possibly. I mean, yeah, I guess you could see it that way. I've never really that considered that resemblance. I guess all communication networks, information networks, look a bit like living organisms. But for me, it was a bit more. I think the way I would put it is, I feel like people who are attracted into the hard sciences, they're attracted to complexity, and they're attracted to novelty. And there's a lot of that in spades in blockchain. Take my experience where, to do what Aztec does today, we've had to do original research, publish academic papers, and then turn those into software, then turn that software to products. That pipeline is not very, it's rare, it's rare. But I think there's something a bit more general with physics, which is that if you do a physics degree, you're effectively a jack of all trades, but a master of none. As in, you can do software engineering, but nowhere near as well as somebody who studied computer science. You can do a little bit of civil engineering, mechanical engineering, but again, nowhere near as well as somebody who's done an engineering degree. You understand mathematics, but nowhere near as well as someone's done a mathematics degree. Basically, you can do. There's lots of roles you can fill, but you can't really fill them as well as somebody who's dedicatedly studied for that role. And so I think that kind of leads to a little bit of an entrepreneurial tint bent to physics grads, because you kind of have to be to find your niche. Because if you try to go down a structured path, then you'll be outcompeted by people who've actually done the degree for the structured path.
It's an interesting point. I would never thought that business is what combines physics and decentralized objects. That is something that I didn't cross. I have another question for you, because you mentioned your brother is an opera singer. So I was going to leave this question for a little bit later, but since you said that, I didn't know your brother was an opera singer. That's quite awesome. How do you, let's say your brother decides to, let's say you guys don't speak that much. Let's pretend for a second, right? And I'm not, let's not take your brother, maybe some other family member. And at a family dinner, you find out that your brother is buying Trump coin. So how do you explain to him the values of Web3 without, let me phrase the question properly without the joke. How do you explain to somebody who is dear to you, to Zac, a family member, the values of Web3, considering what you did in Web3, and disregard the hype that is around Web3 today? Maybe less, but let's say in 2021 or whatever, something like that.
Yeah, is it, to rephrase your question a little bit? Are you getting at the fact that a lot of the Web3 vibes that outsiders see are very trashy, and low status, low quality, and people think that Web3 is a joke. It's a casino. It's just people shilling meme coins, and so when you tell people you're working with Web3, they're like, "How can you do that?" What do I say to them? Yeah, it's a good question. The way I put it is that blockchain decentralization, it's one of these breakthrough technologies that enables new applications, new software, new design space. I think it's a fundamentally new form of communication technology that humanity has unlocked, in that we can now create stores of value, digital currencies that we can transmit and trade with one another without relying on middlemen. This is actually radical. This is actually new throughout the whole world, where if you go back into the past, if you have assets, then unless you're literally storing those assets yourself, they're custodied by somebody else, and you have to rely on them to tell you what they are. Bitcoin was a fundamental new technology which allowed people to acquire consensus on what people learn without a middleman. And with any breakthrough technology, it becomes a gold rush. And with any gold rush, you get scammers. And these people suck all the oxygen and attention out of the room because that's what people focus on, because they're entertaining, they're engaging. People like SBF, following his story, it's compelling. Following the story of people working on real technologies, well, they're working. they're not shilling. They're not living a crazy life in polycules and committing fraud and getting arrested. It's much more boring. And so I focus on two threads. One is what people see from the surface isn't all there is to it. There is a hardcore community of dedicated builders, creators, developers, users that really care about decentralization, care about using this technology as a force for good. And then I also focus on explaining why this technology is a force for good. Why? Because it's quite challenging on the surface, because we're used to modes of transaction in our life which rely on intermediaries. And so trying to imagine a world without that, or where that need is lessened, can be challenging. And so I focus a lot on the financial system, the financial sector, where you put your money in a bank account, and that little sliver of equity is leveraged 10x by the bank, creating lots of obligations, responsibilities that create systematic risk that you pay the price of. As in, if the bank goes under, you're left holding the bag, and assuming everything works out and the bank doesn't go under, well, you have all of these traders, all of these middlemen effectively leveraging your assets for profit, and you get absolute scraps off the table from that. And I think it's very predatory. I focus on how people outside of the developed world don't have access to high-quality financial systems, where it's just hard to save money, for example, things we take for granted. Or I focus on people living in, say, Argentina or other developing countries with manipulated currencies, where your wealth just gets inflated away by money printers. And I try to articulate how blockchain can create alternative solutions for this, and that the fact that we're not seeing them today is because the technology is immature. It needs more time, and it's not because the technology is a dead end.
I would even, add to the bank thing that if you read the fine script, then you realize that any money put in any bank account, doesn't matter in which country, does not belong to you completely. Neither is the bank account. In fact, you are renting a space which you have to pay fees to the bank for. And then, but just to argue with you, just to have just not to agree, but to create a conversation here, isn't blockchain a man in the middle though, a decentralized man in the middle?
Yes and no. In that, it's it depends on the blockchain, but I would argue the good ones, they have these properties of credible neutrality and censorship resistance. The idea is that a blockchain network does not have an opinion on who you are or what you're doing, and if it's designed correctly, it cannot censor you. At the application level, maybe depending on what you're doing, if you're trying to do something regulated, it's important. That can be important. But the network itself, your transaction looks like any other transaction, and because it's I was going to say because it's immutable software, but then you've got to explain to somebody outside this what immutable even means. But basically, because of the focus on cryptography, what's happening is that everybody's collectively running an algorithm. And as long as the algorithm doesn't change, then you have certainty about what's going to happen on chain, and the algorithm can only change through consensus, through a majority of people deciding to switch. And even then, you have this property in Web3 where you can effectively rage quit. If everybody else moves to a fork of Ethereum, you can still stay using Ethereum if you want, and so that incredible optionality is something which is very rare in the world.
Do you think that ever humanity can get to a point where we don't need a blockchain to verify trust, or not to verify trust, or to create a trustless ecosystem, right? Where two people meet, they think of something between themselves, and they are on a level where neither trustless or a trusted system is required for them to verify whatever is they want to agree on. Let's say, I don't know, I want you to build something for me, and you need to carry out those works, or I don't know, whatever. And any contract today requires us either to put it on paper or to put it on a blockchain or anything else. Yeah.
No, I don't see that world, to be honest. I think that it's always going to be essential for effectively two strangers to be able to gain trust in one another. That's the thing about blockchains. I don't really see them as trustless technology. I see them as trust infrastructure technology. It allows people to rapidly gain confidence and trust in one another. So, you can either get that trust through an institution, as you said, through some legal contracts. So, if your counterparty doesn't behave, you get to sue them, keep them honest. Or you can do it through a blockchain in theory. I do see a world where the blockchain infrastructure becomes completely invisible, in the same way that IPv6 is invisible to us. We don't excitedly talk about the HTTPS protocol in our lives. But the way I see it is, the way I hope things develop longer term, is that blockchains become, particularly ones like the one we're building with Aztec, become a source of credentials. And I mean credentials in a very general purpose way. I mean basically proving what you've done in the world and what you're about. So that, say in this example, if I'm contracting with somebody to build a house, I can know very quickly that they are qualified to build that house, they're competent, they have a lot of good reviews, that these reviews are organic and they're not manipulated by bots. And that maybe they have certain certifications that are required from wherever I live. And that I can acquire this information without relying on some third party to collect that information for me. That is the goal, in my opinion.
What is the goal of Zac, not Aztec, but Zac? Privacy is kind of an obvious answer, but I'm talking like Web3. I'm going to focus on Web3. You chose privacy and cryptography not for no reason, right? There was some values that were driving you there, and you kind of started to talk about them. You mentioned a few of them, but what would be for you? I'm going to rephrase that question. What would be for you, for Zac, a complete failure in 5 years from today? And Aztec aside, I'm talking like crypto, blockchain, the space in general. You wake up in 5 years, you look at it and you go, oh my God, that didn't happen, and that's it. That's a failure.
I think in 5 years, if there's not significant amount of real world assets being transmitted on blockchains through privacy technologies, then I think that is a failure. I think that if 5 years might be too soon, but I think if we don't have very efficient payment channels, stablecoin payment channels on a blockchain that are private, that can rival the throughput and costs of the Visa and MasterCard network, then we are a failure. Maybe put that in 10 years' time. I've always just, this is going to be quite vague, but I've always been motivated by a sense of fairness, I think, or at least, I want things to be more fair. I'll start at the beginning of that, okay? Because when I came into Web3, my motivations were not remotely altruistic, to be straight up. I was a software engineer in a windowless basement company in London, and what I wanted was agency over my own life, and I wanted the ability to make a bit of money. But I wanted to do it in a way which added legitimate value. As in, the reason why I was really attracted to Tom's idea, he was my co-founder at the time of CreditNet, this traditional finance idea, was because it was real. 2017 is when we started, and this was the peak of the ICO boom, when people were basically putting bullshit on chain, to not sugarcoat things. They're talking about these stupid ideas that they'll never be able to execute on, and they're raising money before they've even begun to build a product. And most of them didn't work out for obvious reasons. There was launching a bunch of shit coins, or people going I'm going to airdrop pet food into the Sahara Desert on a subscription model on the blockchain, or we're going to put Long Island iced tea on the blockchain, and it's all nonsense, and it was all garbage, and they were raising so much money, and I didn't like that. With Tom's idea, he worked in the City of London. He worked in this mid-market debt system where he understood that basically there was a big problem where lots of actors that hated each other and would stab each other in the back needed to coordinate, and that they were paying middlemen a large amount of money to basically act as that trusted coordinator, and that could be replaced by a blockchain. And so I thought, wow, this is real. You could use this is an actual value proposition which like needs blockchain. So so I love that, and so I thought, yes, okay, so I can I'll tie my bandwagon to Tom. Like we'll team up, because it was, novel technology, exciting, ability to have a bit more control over my own life, maybe make a bit of money, and so that's how I got started. Things changed after about a year and a half, because we discovered that privacy was an existential problem for the success of our startup. Back then, we were quite naive about blockchain. I thought, oh, privacy, that's really important. Surely somebody's figured that out by now. You need that for so much. And then I realized with dawning horror that not really. I mean, you have Zcash, who are incredible pioneers, and you have Monero, but these networks didn't enable programmable privacy, where you could customize, application logic and maintain private information. And so that led me down the rabbit hole of discovering zero-knowledge proofs, zero-knowledge cryptography, and then becoming a zero-knowledge cryptographer. And that process really flicked a switch in me, because it made me realize that there was so much about the world that I took for granted that didn't have to be, that could change. As in, particularly the internet and the broken models on the internet, where, I was an early adopter of the internet. I've had it since I was 7 years old. So, and I'm 37. So, I was around for Web 1.0 in this halcyonic era where, the internet was a much worse experience, but it was also a much more authentic experience, where you had these small communities and networks focused around forums, web rings, where I remember back in the day, you'd always, on an internet forum, if there was a debate, you'd always have a couple of crazy people come in going, oh, you're all bots, this is all a psyop from the CIA. And you'd laugh at them going, oh, don't be stupid. Like, nobody here is a bot. Nobody cares about us. We are a bunch of reject nerds that are being forgotten by the world. And like no one would bother to manipulate what's going on in this space. And nowadays that's not true at all. And so anyway, basically the broken advertising models. I mean, they're broken for humans. They're not broken for the companies that run them. Where we're not the customer, we're the product. What do companies really want? They want our attention so that they can harvest our information. It's very perversely misaligned with what humans actually need and value. And why does this exist? Well, there's no real viable monetization models on the internet outside of advertising. Subscriptions for some services, but not really. Even those start to throw in adverts. I think blockchain can offer alternatives, even though it's as simple as micropayments. Go online. If you want to read a newspaper, you just click a button, you pay 10 cents through your web wallet, and voila. That doesn't exist today because the existing transaction networks, MasterCard, Visa, the fees are too high. You could solve that with a blockchain. And I realized that this data harvesting model could be broken. There could be alternatives through zero-knowledge cryptography. The idea that you could keep your data, like with you, client side, and only share proofs about your information with the services you're using, was revolutionary to me. In many ways, it possibly radicalized me, and it realized that the world that we live in doesn't have to be the world that our descendants will live in. And I managed to crack, with a lot of help, crack the privacy problem. But with that technology, we decided to pivot the company into privacy infrastructure, partly because, we felt this is so much more important than just one application on the blockchain. This needs to be distributed to everybody.
There's a lot of ways to pivot the questions here, and I'm keep on jotting notes, when we speak, so I'm trying to which way to take it. But I guess, one of the first things, you mentioned several times scalability. You didn't say the word scalability, but you mentioned Visa, MasterCard, and the amount of transactions. And when we talk about privacy, everybody knows that, you need more computation. Well, at least so are we thought for today, right? I don't know what's going to happen in a year or 2 years' time, but today we under the impression that the average user or the average developer is that if you need privacy, you need computation. So you're a physicist, right? I mean, and you want a physicist understand that any system can be broken under load, right? Under pressure. It seems that the more we talk about privacy, the more we dive into it. It seems that we're talking about more and more and more and more and more computation, more scalability. Aren't we gonna? It's a stupid question, but I think it's worth asking somebody who's been working on it for a while and is a physicist. Aren't we just gonna at the end come to the point where we're gonna break the system because we're gonna put too much load on it?
Yes and no. So if the system doesn't change, then yes, but the system does change. The way I think about it is through complexity, as in what you're talking about is basically increasing complexity. Privacy adds complexity. And the question with any product is, like, with any process, there's an inherent amount of complexity to it. And the question is who pays for that complexity? And I've set out to answer that question in a very specific way. I think that there are two real kinds of people that should pay that complexity. One, cryptographers and theoreticians, as in you can pay for that complexity by developing more advanced cryptographic protocols that make it faster to prove things, faster to generate ZK proofs, make those proofs more comprehensive, able to prove more statements. That's kind of where I used to make my bread and butter. When I co-researched the PLONK ZK snark, the world's first universal ZK snark, and a bunch of follow-up research based around things like lookup tables, all basically with the goal of saying, okay, well, let's make these ZK provers more efficient, so that you can do more with the same amount of computation. And then on top of that, who else pays for complexity? It's the protocol architects and the protocol engineers to develop more comprehensive blockchain systems and blockchain networks that can handle more load. And there's lots of ways of doing this. And I don't see privacy as being fundamentally opposed to scaling. It makes things a little harder, for sure, because there's more information in a transaction because everything's encrypted. But also, in many ways, it makes things simpler. Because if you have a private transaction, you're modifying encrypted information that you control, and this has some advantages because you remove for a fully private transaction, you remove race conditions. Basically, you cannot have two transactions going on to the network that modify the same piece of information, which means that it is much easier to parallelize block production than a network like Ethereum. This only gets you so far because, I said two users cannot modify the same information on chain, like that's some kind of strength. It's not really, it's a bit of a weakness because you need that for advanced applications. But I see the complexity at the protocol engineering and architecture level, like being able to increase so much that the end user experience should, in my opinion, I don't see a world where long-term blockchains are bottlenecked by throughput, particularly with the rise of application-specific rollups, which I think is the longer-term solution to this problem.
I guess any developer hearing that the blockchains in the future will not have a throughput with bottleneck with throughput is like, oh my god, I feel like those guys on the forum like 30 years ago. Right now, there is no bots here. There's only bots here. Only bots here. No, I'm joking. But about cryptography, it's. I remember like in 2000, I think 18, 19. I was at a conference in Riga, at a Bitcoin conference, and I was talking with Oleg Ganza and Adam Back, and we were talking about. Just cryptography in general. And at one point, I think Oleg, he took out like a piece of, it was a journal that he took, and he explained to me really, really, really down to earth how is a pair of private and a public key generated. And after he finished, which took him about an hour and a half, he said, well, now you know more than 99.99% cryptographers, because cryptography is a science that nobody understands anything about. Okay, jokes aside, why is cryptography so hard to understand? Why is cryptography is the remaining last frontier of, to me, so it seems, of all blockchain aspects? Why can't it be, I don't know, more people going that way and studying cryptography? And is it just too complex? Is that what it is? I mean, there are other complex subjects like quantum physics, right? And people study quantum physics, right? So why?
There's a couple of things. I mean, cryptography is never going to be that accessible, I think, to the general public because it's hard. It's number theory. It's fundamentally about creating one-way functions where you can perform a computation which present where that you cannot reverse, but you still have to encode information like structure about your input data, it's very challenging. I think that certainly the amount of people with cryptographic domain knowledge is going to increase rapidly. It is increasing rapidly, particularly from. Did you say you had that conversation in 2013?
No, it was in 2019, 2020. I think 2019. Yeah.
2019, yeah. Still pretty long time, like relatively a long time ago. What's changed, I think, is the need. As in, before blockchain, cryptography really was separated into two categories. You had real world cryptography, which was relatively static and conservative. It's about symmetric encryption, digital signatures, stuff which I'm very biased. I consider that stuff pretty boring. I know a lot of people find it interesting. For me, it's meh. It had its time. At one point, it was radical. In the 1990s, when people realized you could have digital signatures, that revolutionized the internet. It's the reason why you can pay for things online, right, with your credit card. And there was a big fight to even make that kind of tech legal. So at the time, it was radical. So I don't want to like throw too much shade on it. But it became very stagnant and ossified. And then you had the academic cryptographers, which were focusing on really novel, interesting things, but their ideas were not practical to implement in software, which meant that if you were going to become a cryptographer, it wasn't because you'd make a lot of money, because you wouldn't. You're in academia, salaries are low. It's unlikely that your work would be used in the wider world very much. So you did it for the love of it, because you loved the mathematics, because it interested you. And that meant that not that many people became cryptographers. And then blockchain turned up, and the ZeroCoin paper was published, and Zcash was created. And then you start to have this explosion of really advanced zero knowledge proving systems being developed and deployed, where you can do crazy things. And then there's this focus now on fully homomorphic encryption, the holy grail of cryptography almost, and quantum secure computing, and even quantum cryptography. The idea of you've heard of a one-time pad, right, where you can send an encrypted message once. But have you ever heard of a one-time computation? The idea is I can give you a piece of software and you can run it once and only once. It's wild. It requires quantum computers, so it's not practical. But the floodgates opened, and also it became a lot more lucrative to be a cryptographer. I was very, very lucky to have Jens Groth as effectively my mentor when I was learning cryptography in 2018. He was based at UCL. He is the OG, pretty much, of ZK Snarks. You cannot get anybody who's more legit than Jens Groth. His department at UCL was basically hollowed out by the private sector, because him and all his colleagues were basically given job offers where there was a few more zeros in the compensation package than they were getting in academia, and that's that. And certainly, people like me are getting into cryptography. I didn't get into cryptography because I have an academic interest in it. I got into it because it solved a problem that I had. I'm an engineer first and foremost. So yes, basically there's now an explosion of the number of people getting into and learning about cryptography, because it's become very, very useful very, very quickly.
Very, very useful very quickly. That's a good. I mean, it became applicable. I guess that's the logical explanation, but it's a very good one. I have a private question, which I'm gonna talk. I want to talk a little bit privacy while we still have some time left, of course, in general. But before we talk about privacy, I have a private question, which I cannot help to ask because it relates a lot to me. I've been in this space for a while, and I've been a founder for 5 years or something, but I've worked for much longer in this space. And you wrote a very interesting post about ADHD. And I want to ask you, how do you, as a founder, because the conversation is not about me, but because I know how difficult it's been for me with this condition and other similar conditions, not just to try to stay focused or not to burn out, or to keep on just getting out of bed every day sometimes and trying to, sometimes the opposite, and sometimes it's exactly that. Anyways, not about me, about you. How do you navigate, considering your role that is growing today, and Aztec's role that is growing today, with this, with ADHD, and how do you make it work for you?
Well, I think that's a very old post, isn't it? It's been a while since I've talked about it. It's very challenging.
Sorry, you don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I'm happy to. it's very challenging. ADHD, when it comes to entrepreneurship, ADHD is very much both a strength and a curse. I think in many walks of life, it is just straight up a curse, but there's a lot of benefits to having it in the world of entrepreneurship. And I guess the general like condensed summary of it is play to your strengths, ruthlessly play to your strengths. If someone has ADHD, particularly if they're late diagnosed, then they're likely going to have a lot of image issues and self-confidence issues around executive function, around things like organization, coordination, communication, like not getting distracted, keeping focused. And there's an intrinsic desire to basically focus time on improving these aspects of your who you are. Being a better operator, for example. And whilst that's important to some extent, if you spend a lot of your time focusing on the things that you're bad at, you're not spending any time focusing on things you're good at. And the end result is you'll be less bad at things that you're naturally bad at, which is not a great place to be in a very competitive industry. So I've been very fortunate in my experience with Aztec, which is basically finding a really good support network and finding really good people who can fill in for your weaknesses. I am the CEO, yes, but a lot of the actual responsibility of the CEO are handled by my co-founder Joe or our CEO Lisa, and I'm very upfront about that, and I'm very publicly happy to share that, and that gives me time to focus on some of my core strengths. Like I still do a little bit of cryptography now and then. I do a lot of protocol architecture, software architecture, just little things like we needed a really advanced cryptography library in Noir, and I'm like, well, fuck it, I'll do it because I'm I know how to do this to the standards that are required, and so play to your strengths. Find people to cover for your weaknesses and be very open about it, so that they know what it's like going in. But yeah, it is always a little challenging. The motivational framework for someone with ADHD, it's about interest, creativity, novelty, urgency. Whether something's important or not doesn't really register that much, unfortunately. And so try to make sure you're doing things that either interest you, are creative, are novel, or are urgent. And luckily, as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, urgent is always present. Urgency is always present. So that's never. I've never found that to be too much of a challenge. So I know I've given a long answer, but one other thing about it is, in terms of the strengths of ADHD, when I became a cryptographer, the ability to hyper focus was extremely valuable. So when one has ADHD, right, like it's a deficiency in neurotransmitters in one's brain, things like dopamine, serotonin, and so your brain is always basically searching for stimulation to increase the amount of these neurotransmitters, which is why people with ADHD get so addicted to things. They get addicted to substances, they get addicted to people, or in my case, back in the day, addicted to video games. I became addicted to cryptography because I found it so novel and so interesting. I would go for days where I would get up in the morning and I would literally just immediately start doing research in bed. And then 4 hours later, I'd realize I haven't drunk anything and I need to get a glass of water. Or I'd be working in the office till 3 a.m. in the morning, trying to understand weird niche things about a ZK protocol. And at the time, that's what was needed, because at the time, learning material for cryptography was really not there. As in, how did I become a cryptographer? I did it the hard way. I read cryptographic papers and I tried to extract a teeny bit of information from them. I treated them as like a treasure hunt, where if I didn't understand a paper, I would try to, if the paper created said a statement that I'm like, well, why is that true? I would look at there would come with a reference, and so I look at the reference. And if I couldn't understand the reference, I do the same process, and I look at the statement, and I go back to the reference, and basically back to the roots until I could extract some information. And this was a challenging way of learning cryptography. I wouldn't do it today because there's much better ways, but back then, not really. Particularly ZK snarks. And I needed to be able to hyperfocus to do that. I needed that insane, intense, outrageous level of focus and attention to be able to pull that off. So I don't think I would be where I am today without ADHD.
First of all, thank you for answering in an extensive for answering, and secondly, in such an extensive way. I want to add to what you said, because you said a very useful, understandable, clear thing. Surround yourself by people who fulfill your weaknesses. I want to add to whoever is listening, don't do the other way around. If you're a founder with ADHD, and you get addicted to people, don't surround yourself by people with ADHD, because I've done this before. And instead of looking for people who can fulfill my weaknesses, like what you say, Zach, I think I've already several times experienced, being addicted to people, and it's cool to have people like yourself around you, but when everybody's a little bit, different, sometimes things don't happen. So I definitely want to support what you say there, and absolutely. Bill, I want to talk a little about privacy in the little time that we have left, and there is a lot to be said about it. One, what comes to mind is, for me at least personally, subjectively, one of the most interesting conversations. I mean, we are kind of focused on privacy as a project and as a podcast, as a validator. But one of the most interesting conversations I think I had about privacy was with Chris from Namada, Chris Goes, and what one of the most interesting points he pointed out to me, which was a revelation in a way, which I want to ask you about, was semantics. And he made a really interesting point that privacy, one of the biggest reasons we have such a big deal with privacy, is semantics. We don't differentiate today between privacy, somebody peeking through my window, and me having, I don't know, sex with my spouse, or financial privacy, for example. For us, it's just privacy, right? So I want to ask you, how do you, Zach, Aztec, how do you guys look at privacy and semantics? Is it important, as Chris says, or is there any other really important values to privacy that could shake it as much as semantics can?
Yeah, I do agree with him completely. Semantics is extremely important, and I feel like it's almost like the English language is somewhat deficient here in its vocabulary, because there's a lack of differentiation between those types of privacy. Am I a baddie who wants to hide my actions from people I'm trying to manipulate or cheat, or do I just want or do I want the world to not know about things that how much money I have and what I'm spending my money on? So a bit of a tangent, but I feel like we're missing some actual words here. Can I give an example? Sorry, a bit of a tangent, but the word beautiful. A lot of languages don't really have a word which maps one-on-one with beautiful, and it's an invented word from the 1400s. Because when a man called William Tyndale was trying to translate the Bible into English, he found that there were some Hebrew words he couldn't really map. So he took the French beau, which is good looking, and he said full of beau, beautiful. So yes, semantics are important. And for example, with Aztec, one of the key things that we want to ensure with our network is that we want users to be able to have comfort and confidence that they are not, through participating on our network, they're not assisting bad actors. For example, by adding to anonymity sets. Privacy Pools does a good job of this, for example. With Aztec, we want to take it a lot further, because we have programmable privacy, which means as an application developer, you can program in any compliance checks that you need to satisfy that need from your users. And I do think it's a need, to be honest, for most people at least. And one example is ZK Passport, where you can use digital passport signatures to prove your citizenship. So you can prove you're not on a sanctions list, for example, or being able to prove in ZK, the Coinbase ID protocol, for example, that they've just announced. And so, yeah, for me, privacy is a lot of things. But the main ones that I think are really important in a blockchain context are credentials and assets. Basically, being able to hide who you are on chain, but selectively disclose it to smart contracts and other people if you want to. And also being able to create programmable assets that touch the real world and talk to real world identities in a way that you can put all that information on chain, and you can mediate these assets in trustless, permissionless systems but still be able to program in a level of compliance.
Talking about words, I think Shakespeare is famously introduced into English quite a lot of fucking words just because things didn't rhyme with each other. So yeah, like bubble, right? I mean, the word as in bubble, the water bubble, right? Hubble. But anyways, sorry about to go off as well, but privacy. I've had recently on a couple of more. Well, recently in the past half a year, a couple of more guests that we went deep into privacy from Monero, from Dune Analytics, and the more, how to say, the person that I talk, the more my guest is into privacy in Web3, the more their belief is, even if they are working, on the good side, in quotations. When I say good side, I mean on people who, like yourself, who try to solve privacy. The more they tend to agree that we live in a time, in terms of blockchain, in surveillance machine time, like where Bitcoin is a big surveillance machine. The guy from Dune Analytics, that I was talking to, Boxer, it was like, dude, for me, 2-3 clicks and I know anything about a person, like literally. Okay, over exaggeration, deleted, but still, then we have this narrative that in 2027 in Europe they will outban all private transactions and all private crypto. A lot of things, a lot of bullshit maybe there, but between the lines there is still a lot of fear. And how do you deal with that fear? Why are you not afraid to build a privacy project? And what do you think will happen? Well, not fuck what will happen. Why are you not afraid?
Why am I not afraid? I guess a lot of it is simple bloody mindedness, as in, I'm not doing anything bad. As in, I have my own moral framework, which I think is very good, and I want to increase people's autonomy and agency. I want to make them less reliant on third parties. That's not a bad thing. I feel like, even though today things are going in a strange direction, I feel like the arc of history always tends towards justice in the long term, although there are a lot of casualties along the way. And I feel like, once people see the real value that this technology can provide, opinions will start to change. Right now, it's very easy to make privacy tech seem like some bad thing because the use cases are pretty underdeveloped. I believe that when in the Alexei Pertsov trial, the judge claimed that there was no viable use for blockchain privacy other than for criminals, which is absolute bullshit. Just talk to Vitalik, and like every time he does a transaction, there's like 1,000 people who are following it, and there's big klaxon alerts going on. Or talk to the Ledger CEO who got kidnapped and mutilated by his kidnappers. There's no need for blockchain privacy. Absolute bullshit. Anyway, also, we are, we're doing things by the book. So I don't feel any particular need to be afraid. I might feel a little differently if I was a US citizen in the Biden administration. I'd feel differently. Or if I was an EU citizen, to be honest, I'd feel a little bit worried. But I'm not. I'm British, and for now at least, that's not a bad place to be when it comes to blockchain privacy. But also, I just think it's fundamentally necessary. You were right when you were saying that we're creating surveillance machines. We're creating the most perfect financial surveillance dystopia that one could have dreamed of. All of the insane totalitarian dictators over the years would have killed for a technology like blockchain, where they can force all their citizens to transact on this ledger, where they can see everything. Because money is autonomy, it's agency. You can get people, you can affect the world in ways you want it to be affected by spending money. You can get people to do things you want to do that they don't want to do by giving them money, and making your financial information and data public creates a very chilling effect on what people will spend their money on, and what they will do. I might not want people to know that like some of my particular nerdy hobbies. And certainly there's plenty of people in the world where they do things that are considered like social taboos, but are completely fine and harmless, that they don't want to share in the world. I don't want people to know what my mortgage payments are. I don't want people to people don't want if you used an ATM and that ATM screamed out your bank balance to everyone on the street, would you use it or would you find another ATM? So okay, here's a prediction I have. One I hope will not come to pass, but if we cannot, and by the way I mean the Web3 cannot crack the privacy problem, and blockchains remain transparent and they gain mainstream adoption, we are going to create a surveillance dystopia, and people in that timeline will look back at us today, and they'll look back at all of the speeches and presentations and talks on YouTube given by crypto founders talking about this utopian world they're trying to build, and they will think that they are all they think that we are a bunch of self-centered, greedy, amoral, lying, cheating bastards, like the biggest pack of thieves and liars to ever have existed, because we would have created a world which is completely opposite to the rhetoric. Yeah, I mean, I just don't see there being
I'm pretty sure that you're. I would even say you're underestimating of what they would think of us and how that world would look in terms of dystopia if it is gonna be like that. I think the only reason I see myself. Sorry to interrupt. Go on. Please go on. Sorry.
No, I'm just going to say that I just see it as non-negotiable that blockchains need privacy. We just have to make it happen, and it's hard. But if it was a fundamental impossibility for blockchains to have privacy in them, I would walk away. I'd find something else to do because there's no good that can come of it, in my opinion, long term, without privacy.
Absolutely, I think that the only reason why I think a lot of, at least in my circle of communication, I'm not talking about in work, I'm talking about my closer circle of communication, of friends, of people who are into crypto for a long time, and I'm talking about more than 8-10 years. Most of them are here exactly to disprove what you say, not to let that happen, because they understand, like myself, like you, that hey, I've been a part of this for over fucking 10 years. If I let that happen, what the hell are people like? What's history gonna put down that as, so. Yeah, absolutely. Zac, let me quickly. I have a million other questions, but yeah, sorry. Let me quickly jump into the Blitz.
By the way, I don't know how long you have, but I'm happy to run over a little bit if that would be
useful. Yes. If you can, I have a few more questions. And then fuck the Blitz. I have a couple of more questions, and then I'll do that. But okay, then what is then, in your opinion? Because I had another big question about privacy. At least, well, not one. I have many, but what's missing then? Well, what is the gap that Aztec, for example, cannot fulfill? Let's say Aztec introduces the software layer, right? So here comes the software layer. What would be the remaining gap for privacy that would still need to be completed for us to say, okay, we're done?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, once Aztec goes live, that's only part of the solution. Aztec is always going to be improving over time. We're going to need a lot more throughput than we'll have at mainnet. We always want to, we'll want to make our provers faster. We'll want to make it easier to develop. So all of that. But then in terms of fundamentals, we need network level privacy as well, because yes, Aztec can enable fully end-to-end encrypted blockchain transactions, but getting that information to the blockchain is still leaks like a sieve at the moment. So that's going to be that's a problem. Like we know in theory how to solve it, as in we, the community, but with things like mixedness. But it's executing on that is challenging, and until now, there's really been no point, because who cares about network privacy if you don't have privacy on chain? So it's going to become very important very, very quickly.
I've seen already.
One last thing.
Please do, Zac. No, please do.
This one's a bit not technical. It's not even very cyberpunk at all. But I think that one of the fundamental things that we're going to need is in multiple first world countries that are respected, we're going to need legal precedents that establish that you can that digital ownership of a digital asset on chain can confer ownership rights to physical property in the real world. Right now, that's not. I mean, that's not the precedent's not been set. There's plenty of things with DocuSign and other Web2 technologies which mean that yes, this will happen eventually, but right now it's not really been fully tested. like to give an example, if you want to do under collateralized lending on chain backed by real world assets, well, then you're going to need to reclaim those assets if you get liquidated. How is that going to happen? Well, you need to use a traditional legal system, which needs to respect what happens on chain, and that's a very tricky problem to solve.
That is a super tricky problem. That's not a very tricky problem. I would say that's the trickiest problem, in my opinion, at least. I don't know what you think of it. I don't even know where to begin to solve this, because today, right? I mean, let alone the legal system, right? I mean, I know I'm gonna like pivot what you said a little bit, but to me the logic is there, and I'm sorry that it's a bit of a broken logic, but you're talking about the difficulty of the legal system, the trickstery of the legal system. To me, before looking at that, I would like to understand, how do we make people in this industry who are already here, who are already working on it, accept that values, because you were talking about alternatives many times, about that those things are important, that there is no need for to try and put your pina colada on the blockchain or whatever it is you're trying to do, and there is a need to sort of not to be using, because what I'm afraid of is the moment that privacy, I'm not afraid of that. Actually, I'm not afraid of that. I'm going to delete that sentence. But what I think might happen is when privacy, full on things like Aztec will start to work, and more and more and more, we will see those guys with the pina coladas and with Long Island iced teas are back. We will see more of them. We will just, so how do we as an industry kind of help to educate not just ourselves, but I guess the next generation that comes to use not just Web3, but Web2, and we'll have to, like you say, not to do a very cypherpunk thing, but work on the legal system. So how do we raise that next generation, to think like what we are talking about right now?
Well, here's a challenge, isn't it? Because it's all about incentives. And I hate to be a pessimist, but I feel like if somebody's coming into this ecosystem who is, just wants to make a quick buck, they don't care about hurting people on the way or dumping on retail. They just want to chill and get out. I don't think you're ever going to get those people. You're never going to educate them to care about things like privacy technology and to build meaningful applications, because that's not why they're here. And the downside of a permissionless system is, well, they're going to be there. You can't kick them out. In my opinion, the challenge is to increase the value proposition of blockchain. And I think that privacy does that in a compelling way, so that there's a lot more viable applications and products and services that can be built, which basically means you have a lot more people coming in to do interesting things, and that the more kind of scammy side of blockchain just becomes a much smaller fraction of the whole. In the same way that there's lots of scammy stuff on the internet. But we wouldn't say, oh, let's delete the internet. It's full of scammers. It's like, yeah, it's full of scammers, but it's also essential for human existence at this point. And I see blockchain going the same way.
Okay. One kind of question that is still a little bit about privacy, but I wanted to ask that. It's more about Aztec, I guess, than privacy. But because privacy doesn't equal decentralization, and a lot of people kind of, I don't know, for some reason they put it together, but it's got nothing to do with it. In fact, yeah, you have to sacrifice one to have another. How will Aztec try to solve that? Because you guys are gonna have to build, you guys are gonna have to do a lot of work on building a community, because tribalism is still something crazy in our space. And yeah, how does Aztec work on this increasing decentralization, and not only maybe on the protocol level, but on any possible level that we can think about?
Well, it's very simple for us, to be honest. Like, whilst privacy is not the same as decentralization, they are intuitively linked, because you cannot really have a fully feature-rich programmable privacy network, in my opinion, without decentralization, because you cannot have a central entity which controls all the traffic going through that network. Because if you do, they need to be able to see what's going on, and therefore they will need backdoors. This is just a fundamental reality of the situation. And so for us, we've always seen it as important to be decentralized. Our testnet that we launched last week is decentralized. when we launch mainnet, it will be decentralized. It's partly why it's taking us so long, because it's very hard to combine these two technologies. But for us, it's always it's never been negotiable, and so I guess I see building a community as being slightly separate to this. Obviously, we want a community that holds to our values, and certainly, like, there's two types of community, right? There's community of developers and there's community of users. And the developer community we're creating is really quite, in my opinion, I'm very biased. I think it's very impressive and very wholesome. Like, people come to Aztec because they want to do something. They want to build an application that needs privacy. If you don't need privacy, really, there's not much use going to Aztec, because it's just like any other blockchain, but it's a little bit slower than other layer twos. And they're building really amazing stuff. They're building things like peer-to-peer on and offboarding, where I give you fiat, you give me crypto, and it's all trustless, using things like the open banking API, which is a strange piece of EU regulation, which is actually useful for us. Then there's things like ZK Passport, being able to prove your identity. There's people creating like fully on-chain security tokens. There's people doing things like anonymous whistleblowing on chain, where you can prove you're part of an organization without leaking any other information. So the community, it's intrinsically aligned with us, because you only come here if you share our values, to be honest. I think that's when it comes to our community of users, it's still very early days. We just launched a testnet, but we held our first town hall yesterday. I thought it was unusually wholesome for Web3. And I think again, like, people know what we're about. We've been around for 8 years. I think you don't kind of like follow along with what Aztec's doing if you don't care about privacy, because we might, people in the past know, like, you might be waiting a while for Aztec, just because what we're doing is very hard. So it's kind of the instant gratification crowd. It's not our game.
That's true, by the way, for because I personally started to follow Aztec about a year ago. So because I'm obsessed with privacy, and we actually have launched as well a validator, but so we are participating in the testnet. Yeah, of course we must. We are, like I said, we are privacy a bit focused. So for us, it's very important to be there. I have another last questions for you before we definitely jump into the Blitz, because then I will ask you another million questions. So about privacy and decentralization. So one last question, I promise. Because we have the software layer, right? And let's say the software layer is private, right? And let's say our blockchains are I was going to try and think of a word, privacy and full privacy, full of privacy. That doesn't work for me. No, I cannot invent a word. But okay, full of privacy, and everything is great, and the transactions are shielded, and everybody's happy. But everybody's hosted in Hetzner or AWS. I mean, that's still, I guess, not very private, right? Because, I mean, privacy has nothing to do with this, I guess, on one hand, right? On the other hand, I don't know, what do you think about the whole problem in blockchains that currently they are centralized to several data centers? Because to me, there is a privacy-related question. But yeah, what do you think?
So I slightly disagree on the framing. I think it's important, but I don't think it's important for privacy's sake. I think it's important for censorship resistance. So Aztec nodes, for example, they don't leak any information. If I'm sending a private transaction, the Aztec node doesn't know what I'm doing. It's fully encrypted. All you get are zero knowledge proofs, and so in theory, like, where the nodes are, it doesn't matter from a privacy perspective. It matters from a censorship resistance perspective, because if every node is on AWS and then AWS changes its policies and they're like, actually, no, we don't want, like, no more nodes, then, well, what do? You're dead. And for that reason, I think it's very important that you shouldn't need a data center to run a node. And that's currently the case with Aztec. Well, because we're just in testnet, just released, our technology, our software is early stage. So you need a chunky amount of hardware to run it, but you don't. But you can get that hardware outside of a data center, like to run about that data. And we basically see ourselves very similar to the Ethereum on that, where we want people to be able to run nodes to run validators outside of data centers, and we're willing to make the trade-offs to make that a reality. So that will affect things like the network throughput. And the longer term plan is to do like really, really meaningful scaling, like thousands of TPS through application specific rollups. And make sure the L2 is always censorship resistant.
Thank you for that. I think it's important, and a lot of projects kind of delete the censorship resistance part, and then they realize that, well, there was a glitch in Hetzner and my network went down. What happened? So, okay. Jump into the Blitz. 3 questions not related to blockchain. They're gonna be fun. I promise you. You don't have to answer them in a blitzy way. I call it the Blitz, but yeah. First one, Zac, please give me either a song or a movie or a book that positively influences your work.
A song, a movie, or a book that influences my work?
Positively.
Oh, good Lord. There's many ways I could... Just one. Okay, I could give the intellectual answer and give you something fancy, but I'm not. I'm going to give you the extremely autistic nerd geek answer, which is...
Please do.
The Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
Lord of the Rings.
Yes, I love
that.
it.
I love that. I love that book. I love it because it's... I think only someone who's been through the absolute horrors of something like World War I can write a book which is so ridiculously kind of like optimistic in its perspective on the human condition and the human spirit. Where, how do I put this? At its core, it's a. I know Tolkien himself hated allegory, but I can't see it as anything but like heavily influenced by, I guess you could say, Christianity and Christian allegories. That basically there's this kind of fundamental goodness in the world, and that if good people do good things, it might cost a lot, but basically it'll always triumph over evil. And it is everything today. All our media is always full of everything has to be gritty. It has to be realistic, and it's like I have enough of that in my day-to-day life. With the Lord of the Rings, you have this existential threat and this evil, and a bunch of people rally together and they destroy it. And it's very, I don't know, it's very simple in terms of that, but I find it extremely wholesome, and ties into the whole you can just do things. It's still possible in this day and age to affect good outcomes, I think. And I'm not saying I particularly identify with any character in Lord of the Rings or anything like that, because that's way too arrogant. But just, I don't know, just that relatively simplistic optimism. I find that very motivating.
I can imagine somebody identifying themselves with Tom Bombadil. That would be a bit, imagine, right? The strongest character in Middle Earth. But no, but sorry, we're gonna go all geeky here.
Well, I mean, sometimes birds do want to nest in my hair. Yeah, but I feel I would if I was to give like a proper book, it would be The Dream Machine. Basically talking about the history of computing from the 19...
Man, Tolkien was great.
Fair enough.
Tolkien was great. Don't do that, Zac. Don't do that. Tolkien was an awesome answer. I'm sorry. It was a great answer. I mean, come on. No. We're not gonna cut it out. But it was a great answer. I'm sorry. Okay, second question. Please share with us something motivational that you can share that keeps Zac working 8 years on privacy, staying optimistic, and believing in the end goal.
Okay, I can share something. This is very personal to me. So, in 2002, my father passed away from bone cancer, and when I was I don't want to get into that. That was a very challenging episode of life. But basically, when he passed, and I was going through some of his effects, I found my the PLONK paper that I'd written, and I'd found like an annotated printout that he had. My dad was a graphic designer. Not a mathematical bone in his body. Cryptography was many levels, like way above him. But he was still like methodically going through my paper, trying to understand it because he was proud of me and he cared about what I did and he wanted to understand like what I did. I spent plenty of time talking to him about it, but he wanted to really understand, to the point of going through my academic cryptographic papers as a 70-year-old graphic designer. That thought really it keeps me going. The fact that he cared that much.
That's thank you for sharing that, man. Thank you. That is very, very, very beautiful. I don't, as somebody who doesn't have a father, especially, and never had a father figure in their life, I can totally imagine. Like I have a lot of goosebumps going on my skin now. So very beautiful answer. Thank you, man. Okay, last one to take us out of the.
It's the truth. That's what came to my mind.
Thank you for saying that. Last one. And I promise this is going to be a bit of a weird one. So a real person, it doesn't matter if they're or could be an imaginary personage, could be a cartoon character, a movie character, could be a family member, doesn't matter. Could be somebody from centuries ago, and not a guru, because I don't believe in gurus. I don't think gurus are a thing. I don't believe in idols. So not a guru, not an idol, but a personage. You kind of just talked about your father, but that's a different thing, I think. But who, when you're stuck with work, you think about that personage and it helps you to kind of move through, help the wheels to spin again in work, of course.
Who do I think of when I'm stuck? So I rarely think of people, to be honest, but I think if I did, it would be, there's two people, if I can do that. Because I'm a physicist, by background, a lot of the figures that inspired me, particularly in the past, were physicists. And so I often think of Richard Feynman. Feynman was a genius and an absolute titan of his time. But and he made some of the most meaningful contributions to particle physics of anybody. But he's an interesting character. Like, he's a bit of a joker. He likes to mess around. He's got a lot of hobbies. He doesn't fit the kind of a somewhat like autistic head in the clouds archetype that most of his peers did. And he didn't have, relative to his peers, that high in IQ. He was a genius, but he didn't really show up in the IQ tests because his knowledge, his wisdom, his skill, he was a little bit more practically oriented. He was better at pattern matching than his peers, but he wasn't really very good as a mathematician relative to his peers. Way better than me, obviously. And I find that a little bit motivating. He was totally. I see him as a bit of a fish out of water. He wasn't when it came to raw capabilities, I don't think he was particularly impressive relative to his peers. Yet he was, in terms of outcomes, he was the most impressive of them all. And I find that inspirational. I also find, in another rather silly way, is it? I think. Sorry, let me just. I just want to look up the name.
Check.
Of it. Hang on a minute.
While you're looking up, let me fill in the silence a little bit. So for everybody who's listening, show notes, guys, check the show notes. All the people we mentioned, all the projects we mentioned, everything me and Zac mentioned is under there, linked.
Okay.
Click it. Have a research.
I'm going to give another example of somebody who I might be throwing a little bit of shade on this character. So I don't know if his distant relatives are listening. I apologize.
Let's try.
There's a physicist called Louis de Broglie. Louis de Broglie. I can't pronounce his name.
Okay.
Who made a major breakthrough in quantum mechanics in the 1920s, which is basically he propositioned that matter can act like a wave. Matter can have a wavelength, and all he did was take basically like.
I would talk about the screen experiment with the light.
Yeah, he didn't do the experiment, but basically, let me just try and So, sorry.
Go take your time.
Louis de Broglie. Why do I find him inspirational? Because he was very much a case of like right person, like right place, right time. I think relative to his peers, I don't think he was particularly impressive. But as a PhD student, he made one of the most groundbreaking discoveries in particle physics. He saw an equation, the Planck-Einstein equation that I think it was Planck that was really, Planck and Einstein basically, E equals AHV, like the energy, relating energy and momentum. People were using that to try and understand light and the properties of light. And he's like, hang on, because E equals mc squared, why don't we just like apply this equation to matter instead of light? And if you do, then matter has a wavelength, and maybe we can test that. Like it didn't require any like mathematical genius or any like incredible piercing insight. It was just kind of like just so much new stuff was being discovered at the time, and he's like, hey, what if we just smash these two equations together? It's like maybe that means something, and it did. And because of that, he made a major discovery. And so that kind of motivates me. And that even people who are not anywhere near like their peers can still, if you make the right connections at the right time, you can still do really impressive things.
Zach, I want to thank you on finishing on that note, by the way, because I think it's a very optimistic note compared to my little pessimistic question sometimes. So, Zach, thank you very much. But to find the time to answer the questions, please don't hang up just yet. This is going to be a goodbye just for the listener. For everybody else, thank you for tuning in. And see you next week, guys.
Thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Bye, Zach. This content was created by the Citizen Web3 Validator. If you enjoyed it, please support us by delegating on citizenweb3.com/staking and help us create more educational content.